My husband traded me for 20 camels. Yeah, you heard me right. 20 camels. Not 10, not 5. 20 whole camels. And I know what you're thinking right now. You're probably laughing, thinking this is some kind of funny story I'm about to tell you. But honey, let me tell you something. When that Turkish man looked at my husband and said he wanted to confirm the transaction, like I was a piece of furniture or a used car, I froze. My whole body went cold. I couldn't breathe. Because in that moment, I realized this wasn't a joke. This was real. This man was actually trading me for 20 camels. But let me back up a little bit because you need to understand exactly how we got to that point. How a 58-year-old black woman from Prince George's County, Maryland, ended up standing in a Turkish restaurant while two men discussed her like she was livestock. Because this story, oh my goodness. This story is going to make you mad. It's going to make you question everything you thought you knew about marriage. And it's definitely going to make you think twice about who you let speak for you in public. My name is Gloria Jean Thompson. I'm 58 years old, and I've lived in Prince George's County my entire adult life. I worked for the Department of Education for 32 years. 32 years of pushing papers, dealing with bureaucracy, helping parents navigate the school system, making sure kids got what they needed. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was honest work. It was work that mattered, and I was proud of it. I met Marcus Anthony Thompson in the spring of 1988. I was 23 years old, fresh out of the University of Maryland, with my bachelor's degree in education administration, and I was working my first real job at the central office downtown. Marcus came in one day to submit some paperwork for a construction project his company was doing at one of the elementary schools. He was 25, tall, with this big smile and this energy that just filled up whatever room he was in. He started talking to me while I was processing his paperwork, making jokes about the bureaucracy, about how many forms they made him fill out just to replace some windows. He had me laughing within 5 minutes, actually laughing out loud at my desk, which I never did. I was always the serious one, the professional one, the one who kept her head down and did her work. But Marcus, he made me feel lighter. He made me feel like maybe life didn't have to be so serious all the time. He asked me out that same day, just looked at me with that big smile and said, "I know this is forward, but I'd really like to take you to dinner sometime. You seem like the kind of woman who deserves a nice meal and good conversation." And honey, I should have known right then. I should have paid attention to that word, forward, because Marcus was always going to be forward. Always going to say whatever came into his head without thinking about how it might sound, how it might land, how it might affect the people around him. But I was young, and I was charmed, and when a good-looking man with a steady job asks you to dinner, well, you say yes. We dated for a year before he proposed. It was a good year. He took me to nice restaurants, brought flowers to my apartment, met my mama, and made her laugh so hard she had tears in her eyes. My mama loved Marcus. She thought he was exactly what I needed. Someone to balance out my seriousness, someone to make me smile more, someone to remind me that life wasn't just about work and responsibility. We got married in June of 1989 at the Baptist church my mama had been attending since before I was born. It was a beautiful wedding. Not too big, not too fancy, but nice. My cousin sang Ave Maria during the ceremony, and I wore my mama's wedding dress that she'd kept wrapped in plastic in her closet for 25 years. Marcus cried when he saw me walking down the aisle. Actually cried. And I remember thinking, this is it. This is the man I'm going to spend the rest of my life with. The first few years were good, really good. We bought a little house in Prince George's County. Nothing fancy, just a small 3-bedroom with a yard. And we worked on fixing it up together. Marcus was good with his hands, being in construction and all, and he redid the kitchen and the bathroom and built me these beautiful shelves in the living room for all my books. We were happy. We were building something together. But here's the thing about Marcus that I started to notice more and more as the years went on. The man didn't have an off switch. That sense of humor that had charmed me so much in the beginning, it didn't know when to quit. He'd make jokes at family dinners that would make people uncomfortable. He'd try to be funny during serious conversations, and I'd have to pull him aside later and explain why what he said wasn't appropriate. He'd embarrass me in front of my co-workers at the Christmas party, or say something inappropriate to the pastor after Sunday service, and I'd spend the next week apologizing and smoothing things over. My mama, God rest her soul, she pulled me aside one time. This was maybe 10 years into our marriage. And she said, "Gloria, baby, I love Marcus, I really do, but you need to teach that man when to be quiet. A sense of humor is wonderful, but wisdom is knowing when to use it and when to keep your mouth shut." I tried. Lord knows I tried. I'd talk to him after he'd say something that crossed the line. I'd explain how his jokes made me feel, how they made other people feel. And he'd apologize, he'd promise to do better, he'd be good for a while. But then something would happen, and that mouth would start running again, and we'd be right back where we started. But I loved him. Despite all of that, I really did love him. He was a good provider, worked hard at his construction management job, never missed a day, brought home a steady paycheck. He was good to me in other ways. Remembered my birthday, our anniversary, Valentine's Day. He'd rub my feet when I came home tired from work. He'd make me laugh when I was stressed. He was my partner, you know? My companion. The person I built a life with. We didn't have children. That was something we'd tried for early on, but it just didn't happen for us. After a few years of trying and some doctor visits that didn't lead anywhere, we made peace with it. Decided that maybe it was just going to be the two of us, and that was okay. We poured ourselves into our work, into our house, into our friends and our church community. We built a good life. By the time we hit our 30th anniversary in 2019, Marcus and I had settled into a comfortable rhythm. We knew each other inside and out. We knew each other's habits, each other's moods, each other's pet peeves. I knew that he was going to leave his socks on the bedroom floor no matter how many times I asked him not to. He knew that I needed my coffee exactly the right temperature first thing in the morning, or I'd be cranky all day. That's what 30 years of marriage does. It teaches you how to coexist with another person, how to love them even when they drive you crazy. But I'd been thinking about something for a while. Something I'd dreamed about but never really voiced out loud. I wanted to take a big trip, not just a weekend at the beach or a few days in Atlantic City like we usually did. I wanted to go somewhere exotic, somewhere completely different from anything we'd ever experienced, somewhere that would give us memories to last the rest of our lives. I started researching. Spent my evenings after work looking at travel websites, reading blogs from other people who'd taken these kinds of trips, watching YouTube videos about different destinations. I looked at Greece, the white buildings and blue domes of Santorini. I looked at Morocco, the markets and the desert and the vibrant colors. I looked at Egypt and the pyramids. I looked at India and the Taj Mahal. But something kept pulling me back to Turkey, specifically Istanbul. There was something about that city, the way it sat between Europe and Asia, the way it combined so many different cultures and histories and religions all in one place. The Grand Bazaar with thousands of shops selling everything you could imagine. The Hagia Sophia with its ancient domes and mosaics. The Blue Mosque with its stunning architecture. The Bosphorus Strait with boats crossing between continents. It felt magical, like a place where anything could happen. I brought it up to Marcus one night over dinner. Just casual, testing the waters. What would you think about taking a big trip for our 35th anniversary? Somewhere we've never been before. He looked up from his plate, surprised. Like where? I've been looking at Istanbul, I said. In Turkey. It looks beautiful, rich with history and culture. Different from anything we've experienced. Marcus smiled that big smile of his. Turkey, huh? That's pretty far from Prince George's County. That's the point, I said. I want us to do something special, something memorable. We've worked hard for 35 years. Don't we deserve to see some of the world? He reached across the table and took my hand. Gloria, if you want to go to Turkey, we'll go to Turkey. You start planning, and I'll start saving. And that's how it began. That conversation over dinner in our little house in Maryland. That's what set everything in motion. That's what led us down the path to that restaurant in Istanbul, to those camels, to that moment when my whole world turned upside down. I started planning immediately. And I mean really planning. This wasn't going to be some last-minute thrown-together vacation. This was going to be perfect. I created spreadsheets. I made lists. I researched hotels and restaurants and tour guides. I joined online forums for people who'd traveled to Turkey and asked them questions about the best neighborhoods to stay in, the best time of year to visit, what scams to watch out for. I decided we should go in April of 2024, right around our actual anniversary date. The weather would be perfect. Not too hot, not too cold. The tourist season wouldn't be at its peak yet, so things wouldn't be as crowded. It was perfect timing. But the planning was one thing. The saving? That was another challenge entirely. Because the trip I was envisioning, with the nice hotel and the private tours and the good restaurants, it wasn't going to be cheap. I estimated we'd need about $15,000 to do it right. $15,000 for flights, accommodations, food, activities, and a little extra for shopping and emergencies. $15,000. Do you know how hard it is to save that kind of money when you're living on 2 regular paychecks, maintaining a house, dealing with unexpected expenses that always seem to pop up right when you think you're getting ahead? It's not easy, but I was determined. I started cutting back everywhere I could. I stopped buying new clothes unless I absolutely needed them. I packed my lunch every single day instead of eating out with my coworkers. I cut coupons like my mama used to do, shopping the sales, buying generic brands instead of name brands. I canceled subscriptions we weren't really using. I started doing my own nails instead of going to the salon every 2 weeks. Every little bit I saved went into a separate account I'd set up just for this trip. Marcus did his part too. He started taking on extra projects at work, working some Saturdays to get overtime pay. He stopped going out with his buddies for beers after work on Fridays. He helped me meal plan so we weren't wasting money on takeout. We were both committed to making this happen. It took almost 2 full years of saving like that. 2 years of saying no to things we wanted in the moment so we could say yes to this big dream. And let me tell you, there were times I wondered if it was worth it. Times when something would break in the house and we'd have to dip into the trip fund to fix it. And I'd feel this surge of frustration because we were going backwards instead of forwards. Times when my friends would invite me to go shopping or out to a nice dinner and I'd have to decline because I was saving for Turkey and I'd wonder if I was being ridiculous. Times when I'd look at that balance in the account and think about how long it had taken to save just that much and how much farther we still had to go. But I kept at it. Kept adding to that account, week after week, month after month. And slowly, that number started to climb. $5,000, $7,000, $10,000, $12,000. By the time we hit February of 2024, we were almost there. We had just about everything we needed. I booked the flights first. Non-stop from BWI to Istanbul, business class, because after working this hard and saving this long, we deserved a little luxury. I booked us at a 5-star hotel right on the Bosphorus with a view of the water and the city. I arranged for a private guide for some of our days so we wouldn't have to deal with big tour groups. I made reservations at highly rated restaurants. I planned every single day of that trip down to the hour. And then I thought about who we should invite to come with us. Because as much as I loved the idea of it being just me and Marcus, I also knew that sharing an experience like this with friends would make it even more special. Plus, traveling with other people meant built-in company, someone to take pictures of us together, someone to laugh with when things went wrong. I talked to Diane Harris first. Diane and her husband Robert had been our neighbors for 20 years. They lived 3 houses down from us, and over the years we'd become close friends. We'd had cookouts together, watched each other's houses when someone went out of town, celebrated holidays together. Diane was the kind of friend who'd drop everything to help you if you needed it. Solid, dependable, the kind of person you wanted with you when you were far from home. When I told her about the trip, her eyes lit up. Istanbul? Gloria, that sounds amazing. Let me talk to Robert. Robert was on board immediately. He'd always wanted to visit Turkey, had talked about it for years, but never made it happen. They said yes, within 2 days. Then I called Keisha Banks. Keisha and her husband Jerome were friends from our church. We'd known them for about 15 years, served on committees together, sat in the same pew most Sundays. Keisha was one of those women who spoke her mind, didn't take nonsense from anybody, but would also pray with you when you needed it and bring you a casserole if you were going through a hard time. Her husband Jerome was quieter, more reserved, but solid and kind. They said yes too, said it sounded like an adventure they didn't want to miss. So it was settled. 6 of us, me and Marcus, Diane and Robert, Keisha and Jerome. We'd all fly out together, stay at the same hotel, do most of our sightseeing together. It was perfect. Everything was falling into place exactly the way I'd planned. The weeks leading up to the trip were a blur. I made lists of what to pack. I read every travel advisory and safety warning I could find. I downloaded translation apps on my phone. I researched Turkish customs and etiquette because I wanted to be respectful, wanted to understand the culture we'd be visiting. I bought a new camera specifically for this trip. I got my hair done, bought a few new outfits that would be appropriate for visiting mosques and other religious sites. Marcus teased me about how much I was preparing. Gloria, we're going on vacation, not moving there permanently. You're acting like we're about to climb Mount Everest or something. But I didn't care. This was my dream. This was what I'd worked for, saved for, planned for. I wanted everything to be perfect. The night before we left, I couldn't sleep. I laid in bed next to Marcus, who was snoring away like he didn't have a care in the world, and I stared at the ceiling thinking about all the things we were about to see and do. I thought about walking through the Grand Bazaar, about standing inside the Hagia Sophia, about taking a sunset cruise on the Bosphorus. I thought about how this was going to be the trip that defined our 35th year together, the trip we'd talk about for the rest of our lives. I had no idea, absolutely no idea, that it was going to define us in a completely different way. That instead of beautiful memories, I'd be coming home with a story about how my husband offered to trade me for camels and it nearly destroyed everything we'd built together. But that night, lying in my bed in Maryland, excited and nervous and full of anticipation, that night, I still believed everything was going to be perfect. I still believed that Marcus and I were about to have the adventure of a lifetime. I still believed that after 35 years together, I knew exactly who my husband was and what he was capable of. I was wrong about all of it. The morning we left for Turkey, I woke up at 4 a.m. even though our flight wasn't until noon. I just couldn't sleep anymore. I laid there in the dark listening to Marcus snore, and my mind was racing with all the last-minute things I needed to check. Did I pack my passport? Yes. Did I pack the travel insurance documents? Yes. Did I confirm our hotel reservation one more time? Yes, I'd done it twice already. But my brain just kept going through the list, making sure I hadn't forgotten anything. By 5:30, I gave up on sleep and got up to make coffee. Sat at the kitchen table in my robe, sipping that first cup and looking around our house. This was the longest Marcus and I had ever been away from home together. 10 days. 10 whole days in a foreign country. Part of me was excited beyond words. But another part, a tiny part I didn't want to acknowledge, was nervous. What if something went wrong? What if we got sick? What if we got lost? What if the trip didn't live up to all these expectations I'd built up over 2 years of planning? I pushed those thoughts away. Everything was going to be fine. Better than fine. It was going to be perfect. Marcus came down around 6:30, still half asleep, shuffling into the kitchen in his pajamas. You couldn't sleep either, huh? Too excited, I said. And it was true. The nervousness was there, but the excitement was bigger. We had breakfast together, then spent the morning doing final checks. Making sure all the windows were locked, setting the timers on the lamps so it would look like someone was home, taking out the trash one last time. Our neighbor 2 doors down had agreed to collect our mail and keep an eye on the house. I'd given her a key and written out detailed instructions about what to do if anything went wrong. Diane and Robert picked us up at 10. They were driving us all to the airport, them, us, and Keisha and Jerome. We'd decided it was easier than trying to coordinate multiple cars and parking. Plus, it felt festive, you know? Like the trip was already starting. The drive to BWI took about 45 minutes with traffic. Keisha was in the back seat with me, and she kept grabbing my hand and squeezing it. "Girl, I still can't believe we're doing this. Istanbul? Can you imagine?" I couldn't stop smiling. I've been imagining it for 2 years. Jerome, who was usually pretty quiet, turned around from the front seat and said, "Gloria, I gotta tell you, when you first mentioned this trip, I thought it was just talk. But you really made it happen." "That's impressive." Marcus reached over and patted my knee. "That's my wife. When she sets her mind to something, it's gonna happen one way or another." The airport was crowded like it always is, but we got through security without any problems. Found our gate with plenty of time to spare. Sat there in those uncomfortable chairs watching planes take off and land, and I felt this surge of pure joy. This was really happening. After all the planning and saving and dreaming, we were really doing this. Our flight was called and we boarded. Business class, like I said. Those big comfortable seats that recline all the way back. Plenty of legroom, personal TVs with movies and shows. Marcus whistled when he saw our seats. "Okay, now this is how you travel." Diane and Robert were across the aisle from us, Keisha and Jerome right behind. We were all giddy like kids on Christmas morning. The flight was long. 14 hours with a layover in Frankfurt, Germany. But honestly, I didn't mind. I watched 3 movies, read half a book, dozed off a few times. Marcus slept most of the way, his head back and his mouth open, snoring just loud enough that I had to put in my earbuds. But every time I looked at him, I felt this warmth in my chest. 35 years together. And we were about to make some of the best memories of our lives. We landed in Istanbul around 9 a.m. local time. By the time we got through customs and immigration and collected our luggage, it was after 10. I was exhausted, that bone-deep tired you get from sitting on a plane for hours and not really sleeping properly. But the exhaustion disappeared the second we stepped outside the airport. The air hit me first. Different. It smelled different. Like spices and diesel fuel and something else I couldn't quite identify. The sun was bright and warm, and everywhere I looked there were people speaking Turkish, signs in a language I couldn't read, sounds and colors and energy that was completely foreign to everything I'd ever known. Our guide was waiting for us right outside the terminal. His name was Ahmet, a friendly man in his 40s with perfect English and this warm smile that immediately put me at ease. He helped us load our luggage into a large van and started driving us toward the city, pointing out landmarks along the way and giving us a running commentary about Istanbul's history. I pressed my face to the window like a child, trying to take in everything at once. The buildings, the mosques with their minarets reaching toward the sky, the Bosphorus Strait sparkling in the sunlight, the mix of old and new architecture side by side. It was overwhelming in the best possible way. "This is incredible," Diane whispered from behind me. "Gloria, this was such a good choice." Marcus had his arm around my shoulders, and he kissed the top of my head. "You did good, baby. Real good." Our hotel was in the Sultanahmet district, right in the heart of the old city. When the van pulled up in front of it, I actually gasped. It was beautiful. Not modern beautiful, but elegant beautiful. Classic beautiful. The kind of building that had been standing there for 100 years and would still be standing there for 100 more. The lobby was all marble floors and crystal chandeliers and fresh flowers everywhere. The staff greeted us in English, offered us cold towels and glasses of something sweet to drink while they checked us in. I felt like royalty. I'm telling you, I had never in my life been treated like this. They took us up to our rooms, and when the bellhop opened the door to ours, "Honey!" I almost cried. The room was gorgeous, huge king-sized bed with crisp white linens, sitting area with comfortable chairs and a small couch, bathroom with a deep soaking tub and one of those rainfall shower heads. But the best part, The absolute best part was the balcony. I walked out onto that balcony, and there it was. The Bosphorus, right there in front of me. Boats crossing back and forth between Europe and Asia. The water sparkling in the afternoon sun. The sounds of the city rising up from below, car horns and boat whistles and the distant call to prayer from a nearby mosque. Marcus came up behind me and wrapped his arms around my waist. "Worth every penny, huh?" I nodded, not trusting myself to speak without crying. Because it was worth it. All the saving, all the sacrifice, all the planning. This moment right here made it all worth it. We unpacked, took showers to wash off the travel grime, and met the others in the lobby around 2 p.m. Amit had arranged for us to have a light lunch at a nearby cafe, then take the rest of the afternoon to explore the area around our hotel on our own. Tomorrow, he said, the real sightseeing would begin. That first lunch in Turkey, I can still taste it. Fresh bread, olive oil, hummus, grilled vegetables, lamb so tender it fell apart when you touched it with your fork. Everything was seasoned with spices I couldn't quite identify, but that made my mouth water. We ate outside under an awning, watching people walk by, and I kept thinking, I'm in Turkey. I'm actually in Turkey. After lunch, the 6 of us just wandered. Walked through the narrow streets around Sultanahmet Square, peeking into shops, watching artisans work, taking pictures of everything. The Blue Mosque was right there, just a few blocks from our hotel. And even though we weren't going inside until tomorrow's tour, we stood outside and stared up at it. 6 minarets reaching into the sky, the setting sun making the stone glow golden. "It's even more beautiful in person," Keisha said, and she had tears in her eyes. We found a little tea house and sat outside drinking Turkish tea from those small curved glasses they serve it in. The tea was strong and sweet, and I felt so present, so completely in the moment, not thinking about work or bills or anything back home. Just sitting there with my husband and my friends, drinking tea in Istanbul. That first night, we had dinner at the hotel restaurant. More incredible food. Medzi platters and grilled fish and baklava for dessert that was so good I had to stop myself from eating the whole plate. We laughed and talked and made plans for the next day, and I went to bed that night feeling like the luckiest woman in the world. Day 2 started early. Amit picked us up at 8 a.m. for our tour of the Hagia Sophia. I'd read so much about this place, seen so many pictures, but nothing prepared me for actually being inside it. The dome. Oh my Lord, that dome. It seemed to float above us, held up by nothing but light and prayer. The mosaics on the walls, some of them over 1,000 years old, glittering with gold leaf. The massive columns, the sense of history that pressed down on you. Not in a heavy way, but in a way that made you feel small and connected to something so much bigger than yourself. I stood in the center of that vast space with my head tilted back, staring up at that dome, and I felt Marcus take my hand. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. We just stood there together, holding hands, taking it all in. Amit explained the history to us, how it had been built as a Christian church in the 6th century, converted to a mosque after the Ottoman conquest, then made into a museum, and recently converted back to a mosque. How it represented layers and layers of history, of faith, of human achievement. I could have stayed there all day. After the Hagia Sophia, we visited the Basilica Cistern, this ancient underground water storage system with hundreds of columns rising out of dark water, lit dramatically with colored lights. It felt like something out of a movie. Mysterious and beautiful and slightly eerie. We had lunch at a restaurant Amit recommended, then spent the afternoon at the Topkapi Palace. Walking through the rooms where sultans had lived, seeing the treasury with its incredible jewels and artifacts, standing in the courtyards overlooking the Bosphorus. Every room we entered, I'd think, this is my favorite part, and then we'd go to the next room, and I'd think the same thing. By the time we got back to the hotel that evening, my feet were aching and my head was spinning with everything we'd seen. But I was happy, so deeply, completely happy. Day 3 was the Blue Mosque and the Grand Bazaar. The Blue Mosque. I'd been looking forward to this since I first started planning the trip. We had to dress appropriately. I wore a long skirt and a scarf to cover my hair, and honestly, I didn't mind at all. It felt respectful. It felt right. Inside, the blue tiles that give the mosque its name covered every surface. Thousands and thousands of handmade tiles in dozens of shades of blue, creating these intricate patterns that made your eyes want to follow them forever. The light coming through the stained glass windows cast colored shadows on the carpet. It was quiet inside. People praying, people simply sitting and contemplating. It felt sacred. Even though it wasn't my religion, even though I was just a visitor, I felt the holiness of that place. We sat for a while, just absorbing it. And I found myself praying too. Thanking God for this opportunity, for this experience, for the ability to see such beauty. Asking Him to bless the rest of our trip, to keep us safe, to help us appreciate every moment. After the mosque, we went to the Grand Bazaar. And honey, if you've never been to the Grand Bazaar in Istanbul, let me try to explain what it's like. Imagine the biggest shopping mall you've ever been in. Now multiply it by 10. Now imagine it's been there for 500 years. Now fill it with thousands of tiny shops selling everything you can possibly imagine. Carpets, lamps, jewelry, spices, ceramics, leather goods, textiles, antiques, sweets. Now add the sounds of merchants calling out to customers, the smell of spices and leather and coffee and incense all mixed together. Now add the crowds, locals and tourists from every country in the world, all packed into these narrow covered walkways. It's overwhelming, it's chaotic, and it's absolutely magical. We wandered through that bazaar for hours. I bought a beautiful ceramic bowl painted with traditional Turkish designs. Diane found a hand-woven scarf. Keisha bought spices to take home. The merchants were friendly, calling out to us, offering us tea, trying to coax us into their shops. Marcus joked around with them, haggling over prices even though he wasn't planning to buy anything, just enjoying the back and forth. And that's the thing. Up until this point in the trip, Marcus had been perfect. He'd been charming and funny without crossing any lines. He'd been respectful in the mosques and museums. He'd been a good husband, a good travel companion. He'd made me laugh every day without making me cringe. I'd actually thought to myself more than once during those first 3 days, see, he can control himself when he wants to. He knows how to act right. I had no idea that was all about to change. On the evening of day 3, we took a sunset cruise on the Bosphorus. It was included in the tour package I'd booked, and I'd been looking forward to it almost as much as seeing the Hagia Sophia. We boarded this beautiful wooden boat along with about 30 other tourists, and as the sun started to set, we cruised along the strait, passing under bridges, seeing both the European and Asian sides of Istanbul lit up against the darkening sky. The boat served dinner, more delicious Turkish food, and as we ate, a traditional music group played. The sound of the oud and the ney flute floating across the water. The lights of the city twinkling. Marcus with his arm around me, both of us standing at the railing, looking out at this incredible view. "Happy anniversary, baby," he said, even though our actual anniversary was still a few days away. "Happy anniversary," I said back, and I meant it. In that moment, I was so happy I could barely contain it. We got back to the hotel around 10 p.m., tired but in that good way where you're exhausted but satisfied. We said goodnight to Diane and Robert and Keisha and Jerome in the lobby, then went up to our room. I took a long bath in that gorgeous tub, soaking my tired feet and thinking about everything we'd seen over the past 3 days. Marcus was on the balcony, probably smoking one of those occasional cigars he liked to have when we were on vacation. I could hear him out there, humming to himself. When I got out of the bath and came into the bedroom, he was sitting on the edge of the bed, looking at something on his phone. He looked up when he saw me and smiled. "You know what? This has been one of the best trips we've ever taken. Maybe the best. You really outdid yourself with this one, Gloria." I sat down next to him, feeling warm and content. It's been pretty perfect, hasn't it? Perfect, he agreed. Can't imagine how it could get any better. And right then, if someone had told me that in less than 24 hours, everything was going to fall apart, that Marcus was going to say something so stupid it would nearly destroy our marriage and cost us $8,000, I would have laughed in their face, because in that moment, everything was perfect. Everything was exactly the way I dreamed it would be. We went to sleep that night, tangled up together in those crisp white sheets, with the sounds of Istanbul drifting through the open balcony door, the call to prayer from a distant mosque, the horns of boats on the Bosphorus, the murmur of the city settling down for the night. I fell asleep thinking about how lucky I was, how blessed, how this trip was everything I'd hoped for, and more. I had no idea what the next day would bring. No idea that my perfect dream vacation was about to turn into a nightmare. We woke up on day 4 around 8 a.m., had breakfast at the hotel, fresh fruit and yogurt, and these amazing pastries. Turkish coffee so strong, it made my American coffee back home taste like water. The 6 of us sat together at a table by the window overlooking the Bosphorus, making plans for the day. We'd decided to take it a little easier today. We'd been going hard for 3 days straight, and we were all feeling it in our feet and our legs. Ahmet had given us some recommendations for places we could explore on our own, at our own pace. One of the places he'd mentioned was this traditional Turkish restaurant in the heart of the Grand Bazaar. He said it was a local favorite, the kind of place tourists don't usually find, and the food was incredible. That sounded perfect to me. We could wander through more of the bazaar, do some shopping, then have a nice leisurely lunch somewhere authentic. No rushing, no tour schedule to keep. Just a relaxed day enjoying the city. We left the hotel around 10:30, took a short taxi ride back to the Grand Bazaar area. The morning was beautiful, warm but not hot, clear blue sky, perfect weather for walking around. We spent a couple hours just exploring parts of the bazaar we hadn't seen yet, poking our heads into different shops, watching craftsmen work. Around 1 p.m., we started looking for that restaurant Ahmet had told us about. It took us a while to find it because it was tucked away in a section of the bazaar that wasn't as heavily trafficked by tourists. But when we finally found it, it looked perfect. Traditional decor, tables both inside and outside, Turkish music playing softly, and the smell. Oh my Lord, the smell of the food coming from that kitchen made my stomach growl. We grabbed one of the outdoor tables. It was in a nice spot, kind of on the edge of the main walkway, but with a good view of people passing by. The waiter brought us menus and glasses of water, and we started looking at all the options, trying to decide what to order. Marcus was being his usual self, making jokes about not being able to pronounce any of the dish names, asking the waiter for recommendations, keeping everybody at the table laughing. Normal Marcus, fun Marcus, the Marcus I'd fallen in love with all those years ago. We ordered a bunch of different dishes to share. Kebabs and rice and mezzi and flatbread. The food started arriving, and it was all delicious. We ate and talked and laughed, taking pictures of the food and each other, enjoying this perfect moment in this perfect trip. I remember thinking to myself, this is exactly what I wanted, this right here. This feeling of being somewhere completely different, sharing it with people I love, making memories that we'll talk about for years. I had no idea, absolutely no idea, that in about 15 minutes, a man was going to walk up to our table and say something that would change everything. That would turn my dream trip into a nightmare. That would make me question my entire marriage and whether the man sitting next to me, laughing and eating kebabs, actually respected me at all. But in that moment, I was just happy. Just enjoying my lunch in Istanbul with my husband and my friends, watching the world go by, feeling grateful for everything we had and everything we were experiencing. And then I saw him. This Turkish man, maybe mid-40s, wearing traditional clothes, walking through the crowd of the bazaar. He was looking at something, looking at our table, looking at me, and he started walking toward us. I watched this man walking toward our table, and at first I didn't think much of it. The Grand Bazaar was full of merchants trying to get tourists' attention, trying to draw them into shops, trying to make a sale. I figured he was just another shop owner about to invite us to come look at his carpets or his jewelry or whatever he was selling. But something about the way he was looking at me, it made me uncomfortable. Not in a dangerous way, but in that way where you know someone is sizing you up, evaluating you, seeing something in you that you're not sure you want them to see. He reached our table and stopped. Just stood there for a moment, looking at me. Then he turned to Marcus and started speaking in English, but with this thick Turkish accent that made some of his words hard to understand. He told Marcus that I was a very beautiful woman, that I looked strong, that I was a good age. And then he said he would give Marcus 3 camels for me. The whole table went quiet. I mean completely quiet. Diane's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. Keisha's eyes got wide. Robert and Jerome looked at each other with these expressions like they couldn't believe what they'd just heard. And me? I felt my stomach drop down to my feet. Because even though this man had kind of a smile on his face, even though his tone was somewhat light, something about the way he said it didn't feel like a joke. It felt real. It felt serious. But Marcus, oh Lord, Marcus thought it was the funniest thing he'd ever heard in his life. He threw his head back and let out this big, loud laugh. That booming laugh I'd heard 1,000 times over 35 years. And all I could think was, please don't encourage this. Please just politely decline and let this man move on. But that's not what Marcus did. No. Marcus looked at this Turkish man with this big grin on his face and told him that 3 camels was insulting. That I was worth at least 30 camels. Nothing less. I felt my face get hot. Felt this wave of embarrassment wash over me because my husband had just put a price on me, had just assigned me a value like I was a piece of property he was willing to negotiate over. And he was laughing about it. Thought it was hilarious. The man didn't laugh, though. He didn't smile bigger or act like he thought it was funny. He just looked at Marcus very seriously, very calmly, and nodded his head once. Then he said 2 words that should have been a warning to all of us. He said, "Wait here." And then he turned around and walked away. Just disappeared back into the crowd of people moving through the bazaar. Diane immediately turned to Marcus and asked him what he'd just done. Her voice had this edge to it, this concern that I was feeling too, but hadn't been able to voice yet. Marcus waved his hand like it was nothing, told her to relax, that it was just a joke. He said these guys were probably trying to entertain the tourists or something, trying to get tips maybe. He was still chuckling to himself, shaking his head like he'd just had this amusing little interaction. But I wasn't amused. I felt sick. I felt disrespected. I felt like my own husband had just offered me up for sale in front of our friends and a restaurant full of strangers. And something in my gut, something deep down inside me, told me this wasn't over, told me that man had been serious, told me we'd just stepped into something we didn't understand. Keisha reached across the table and touched my hand, asked me if I was okay. And I tried to smile, tried to laugh it off like Marcus was doing. Told her I was fine, that it was just weird. But I wasn't fine. My hands were shaking. My heart was beating fast, because that man's face when he'd walked away, he'd looked so serious, so purposeful. We sat there trying to get back to our meal, trying to recapture that happy feeling we'd had just a few minutes earlier. But nobody was really eating anymore. We were all just kind of pushing food around on our plates, making awkward small talk, avoiding what had just happened. The minutes ticked by. 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes. And I started to relax a little bit. Started to think that maybe Marcus had been right, that it was just some weird tourist interaction and the guy wasn't coming back. We could finish our lunch, pay the bill, and move on with our day. Forget this ever happened. But then I saw him, coming back through the crowd, and he wasn't alone. He was walking with an older man, maybe 70 years old, dressed in even finer traditional clothes than the first man had been wearing. And both of them were walking straight toward our table with these very serious expressions on their faces. No smiles, no friendly demeanor. Just this calm, purposeful walk like men on a mission. I grabbed Marcus's arm, told him the man was coming back. And when Marcus looked up and saw the two men approaching, I saw his smile falter. Just a little bit. Just enough to tell me that maybe, finally, he was starting to realize this might not be the joke he'd thought it was. The two men reached our table and stopped. The older one looked at all of us, then focused his eyes directly on Marcus. And when he spoke, his English was perfect, clear and precise, with no accent at all. Professional. He called Marcus Sir and told him that his nephew Mehmet had spoken with him about Marcus's offer. He said that after careful consideration, they decided to accept. Not 30 camels. They couldn't afford 30. But they were offering 20 camels as their final price for me. He said this was very generous, that these were quality animals from their family farm outside the city. He asked when Marcus would like to complete the transaction. Time stopped. I swear to you, time actually stopped. The noise of the restaurant faded away. All I could hear was that word echoing in my head, transaction, like I was a car, like I was a house, like I was something that could be transferred from one owner to another with the right paperwork. Marcus wasn't laughing anymore. His face had gone completely serious. He tried to explain that he'd just been joking, that he didn't actually mean it. But the older man's expression didn't change at all. He told Marcus that in their culture, a man's word is sacred, that Marcus had made an offer, that Marcus had said I was worth 30 camels, that they'd negotiated down to 20, that this was accepted business now, that Marcus couldn't dishonor them by refusing. And that's when I knew. I knew in that moment with absolute certainty that this trip, this perfect anniversary celebration that I'd planned for 2 years, that I'd saved $15,000 for, that I'd dreamed about for so long, this trip was about to become the worst experience of my entire life. Marcus was stammering, actually stammering. And I'd been married to this man long enough to know all his faces, all his tones, all his moods. This was fear, real fear. The kind you get when you suddenly realize you've stepped in something way deeper than you ever intended. He tried to explain to this man. His name was Hassan, I learned later. He tried to explain that he was just joking around, just having some fun, that this wasn't how things worked in America. Asked if Hassan understood. But Hassan's face stayed calm and serious. He explained that in Turkey, a man's word is his bond. That when you make an offer in the marketplace, especially in front of witnesses, that offer is considered binding. He said Marcus had dishonored him and his nephew by suggesting this wasn't a serious negotiation. The younger man, Mehmet, said something in Turkish to his uncle. I didn't understand the words, but I understood the tone. He was backing up everything Hassan was saying, making it clear they weren't playing around. Diane said we needed to leave right now. Her voice was tight with worry, but Hassan heard her. He turned those calm, serious eyes on her and told her that Marcus had entered into an agreement. That in their culture, walking away from such an agreement without proper resolution was a grave insult. That it would bring shame to their family name. Robert stood up, trying to look brave even though I could see his hands shaking. He tried to explain that this was all just a big misunderstanding, that Marcus didn't know their customs, that he was just trying to be friendly, that he didn't mean any disrespect. Hassan said that disrespect had been given regardless of intent. His voice was still calm, but there was steel in it now, cold steel. He explained that his nephew had approached our table with a genuine offer, that Marcus had countered with a higher price, that they'd accepted his terms at a reduced rate out of respect and fairness, and now Marcus wanted to withdraw? This was not acceptable. I finally found my voice. It came out shaky and small, not like my voice at all. I told him that I wasn't up for negotiation, that I was a person, that I wasn't something that could be bought or traded. Hassan looked at me then, and his expression softened just a tiny bit. He told me that in their culture, this wasn't about me being property. This was about honor, about a man keeping his word. That Marcus had made an offer and they'd accepted. That this was the way business was conducted in their culture. Keisha stood up, and her voice was sharp. She told him this wasn't business, that this was a human being they were talking about. That she didn't care what their customs were, they couldn't force someone to give up their wife because of a joke. Mehmet said something to Hasan in Turkish, and his tone was getting more aggressive. Hasan responded, then turned back to Marcus. He told him they'd offered a very fair price, that 20 quality camels was worth approximately $15,000, that this wasn't a small offer, that they'd acted in good faith, that Marcus must do the same. $15,000. That number hit me like a physical blow. That was exactly what we'd spent on this entire trip. Everything I'd saved for, everything I'd planned, everything I'd sacrificed, it all added up to the same price they were putting on me. My value as a human being was equal to the cost of our vacation. Marcus was sweating now. I could see drops forming on his forehead, running down the sides of his face. He told them he didn't want their camels, didn't want anything, just wanted to have lunch with his wife and friends and forget this ever happened. But Hasan said it had happened, and now they had to resolve it properly. That's when Mehmet turned and called out something in Turkish, loud, across the restaurant. And I watched with this sick feeling in my stomach as two more men stood up from a table near the back. They were younger, bigger, and they started walking toward us with these serious expressions on their faces. Diane grabbed my hand under the table, told me we needed to get me out of there. But where was I supposed to go? We were in the middle of the Grand Bazaar, surrounded by thousands of people, in a country where I didn't speak the language, didn't know the laws, didn't know anything except that my husband's stupid joke had somehow turned into a situation that felt dangerous. The two men reached our table and stood behind Hasan and Mehmet. They didn't say anything. They just stood there with their arms crossed, making it very clear that we weren't just going to walk away from this. Other people in the restaurant were starting to notice. I could see heads turning, conversations getting quieter as people watched what was happening at our table. Some looked concerned. Some looked almost entertained, like this was just another show for the tourists. Marcus tried one more time, told them he was sorry if he'd offended them, that he really was sorry, but that they had to understand. In America, when someone makes a joke like that, nobody takes it seriously. It's just talk. It doesn't mean anything. Hasan's jaw tightened. That was the first time I saw real anger in his face. He asked if it meant nothing. If Marcus assigned a value to his wife and then said it meant nothing. Asked if this was how American men treated their promises. How they treated their honor. Other Turkish men from nearby tables were starting to stand up, starting to come closer, and I realized with this cold, horrible clarity that we were outnumbered. That in this place, in this culture, these men saw Marcus as someone who'd broken a sacred rule, someone who'd made a deal and was trying to back out. Jerome stood up, trying to position himself between the Turkish men and our table. He told everyone to calm down, to take a breath, to figure this out like reasonable people. But Hasan said they were being reasonable, that they'd made a fair offer, that they'd been patient, that Marcus was the one not being reasonable. The restaurant manager came rushing over then. He was a small man, probably in his 50s, wringing his hands and looking back and forth between Hasan and our table like he didn't know whose side to take. He said something in Turkish to Hasan, probably asking what the problem was. Hasan responded quickly, gesturing to Marcus and then to me. The manager's eyes got wide. He looked at Marcus like Marcus had just committed some terrible crime. Then he pulled out his phone. I knew what he was doing. We all knew. He was calling the police. My heart started pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Police, in a foreign country, where we didn't know the laws, didn't know our rights, didn't know anything, except that my husband had apparently entered into some kind of binding agreement that he couldn't just laugh his way out of. Hasan seemed satisfied that the manager had made the call. He nodded, then turned back to Marcus and told him that the authorities would help them resolve this properly. That they would explain to Marcus that in Turkey, a verbal contract in the marketplace is legally binding, especially when witnesses are present. Marcus's voice cracked when he asked if Hassan was serious about it being legally binding. Hassan said he was completely serious, that Marcus would either honor his agreement and accept payment or face consequences for breach of contract and public dishonor. I couldn't sit there anymore. I just couldn't. I pushed back from the table and stood up, and my whole body was shaking. I told them I was not being sold, that I was not property, that I was a United States citizen, and they couldn't do this. Hassan looked at me with what I can only describe as pity, told me he understood I was upset, but that this was between Marcus and them, that Marcus had made the offer, not me. I felt my voice getting louder, and I didn't care who heard me. I told him I didn't care who made the offer, that you cannot trade a human being, that this was insane. Keisha and Diane both moved to stand next to me, putting themselves between me and these men like they were going to protect me if things got worse. And God bless them for that. A crowd was forming. Turkish people from other tables, tourists with their phones out taking videos, shop owners from nearby stalls coming to see what all the commotion was about. I could hear people talking in different languages, could see them pointing at me. I felt so exposed, so humiliated, so completely helpless. Marcus asked the manager how long until the police arrived. I could hear the desperation in his voice. The manager told him 5 minutes, maybe 10, 5 to 10 minutes. That's how long I had to stand there being discussed like livestock, while a crowd of strangers watched, and my husband stood there looking like he wanted the ground to swallow him up. Hassan pulled out his phone and made a call, spoke in rapid Turkish, and even though I couldn't understand the words, I understood the tone. He was calling someone important, someone who could back up whatever he was about to do. Marcus tried to move toward me, tried to put his hand on my shoulder, and I jerked away from him. I couldn't help it. All I could think was that this was his fault. His stupid, thoughtless, careless joke had put me in this position, had made me feel like an object instead of a person, had brought all these men and all this attention and all this fear into what was supposed to be our dream vacation. He said my name. His voice was breaking. Told me he was sorry, that he didn't know, that he didn't think. And I told him that was his problem, that he never thinks, that he just talks and laughs and assumes everything's going to be fine because it always has been before. But this time he'd gone too far. My voice was so cold when I said it, so cold it surprised even me. Hassan finished his phone call and told Marcus that his attorney was on his way, that he would help them document the agreement properly, that once the police arrived, they would all go together to make it official. Robert asked what he meant by official, told him he was talking about buying a human being, that there was nothing official about that it was illegal, that it was wrong. Hassan said that perhaps it was illegal in our country, but we weren't in our country. We were in Turkey. And here, verbal contracts were taken very seriously. I could see tourists in the crowd filming this on their phones, could see them whispering to each other, probably posting it on social media already. Tomorrow morning, this was going to be everywhere. Not the beautiful mosques or the boat ride or the amazing food. The story was going to be about how Marcus Thompson tried to sell his wife for camels in a Turkish market. The shame of it. The absolute crushing shame. Jerome tried one more time. Asked Hassan what if they compensated him somehow. What if they paid him something for his trouble, for the misunderstanding, and everyone just walked away? Hassan considered this for just a moment, then shook his head. Said it wasn't about money. It was about honor. That Marcus had damaged his family's honor by making false promises in the marketplace. That this couldn't be fixed with simple payment. Marcus asked what Hassan wanted then. His voice was so desperate, so lost. Hassan said simply that he wanted what was promised. Or he wanted public acknowledgement that Marcus was a man without honor and compensation for the insult given to his family. That's when I heard the sirens. Distant at first, then getting closer. Police sirens. In Turkey. coming for us. Diane squeezed my hand, told me it was going to be okay, that we were Americans, that they couldn't just do this to us. But I wasn't so sure. I'd heard enough stories about Americans getting in trouble in foreign countries, about people who thought their citizenship would protect them, only to find out that laws are different in different places, that what seems crazy to us might be perfectly normal somewhere else. The sirens got louder, the crowd got bigger, and I stood there in the middle of that Turkish restaurant with my friends surrounding me and my husband looking like his whole world was collapsing. And I thought about what my mama used to tell me when I was young. She used to say you can forgive a lot of things in a marriage, mistakes and bad moods and even some lies. But you can't forgive a man who doesn't protect you. You can't forgive a man who throws you to the wolves just to get a laugh. And in that moment, with those police sirens getting closer and that Turkish man talking about ownership and transactions and binding contracts, I realized my mama might have been right. Because Marcus hadn't just made a joke. He'd offered me up. He'd put a price on my head. He'd valued me at 30 camels, like I was something he could trade away if the price was right. The police cars pulled up outside. I could see the blue lights flashing through the windows. Could see the officers getting out, adjusting their uniforms, preparing to come inside. And honey, when I saw those Turkish police officers walking toward that restaurant in their uniforms I didn't recognize, ready to enforce laws I didn't understand. When I saw them coming to sort out this mess that my husband had created, I thought to myself, this is it. This is really happening. I'm about to find out if I have any rights in this country, if my citizenship means anything, if these men can actually force my husband to go through with this insane transaction. The officers walked through the door. The whole restaurant went silent. Every eye in that place turned to watch what was going to happen next. And all I could do was stand there and pray that somehow, some way, this nightmare was going to end without me becoming property in a foreign country. The two police officers who walked into that restaurant looked official and serious in a way that made my stomach drop even further. They were wearing these dark blue uniforms with badges and equipment on their belts, and they had these expressions on their faces like they dealt with difficult situations every single day, and this was just another Tuesday afternoon for them. The manager rushed over to them immediately, speaking in rapid Turkish and gesturing toward our table. One of the officers, the older one, maybe in his 40s, listened carefully, then looked over at us. His eyes scanned our group. Me standing there shaking, Marcus looking like he was about to be sick, our friends positioned around us like they were trying to form some kind of protective barrier. Then the officer walked over to Hassan. They spoke in Turkish for what felt like forever, but was probably only 2 or 3 minutes. Hassan was calm and measured, explaining something with occasional gestures toward Marcus and me. The officer nodded, asked questions, took notes in a small notebook he'd pulled from his pocket. The second officer, younger, maybe late 20s, came over to our table. He asked in heavily accented English if any of us spoke Turkish. We all shook our heads. He sighed, then asked Marcus to explain what happened. And Marcus tried. Lord knows he tried. But how do you explain something like this? How do you tell a police officer in a foreign country that you jokingly offered to trade your wife for camels, and now some men think you entered into a legally binding contract? It sounds insane. It sounded insane coming out of Marcus's mouth. The young officer's face remained completely neutral as Marcus talked. He didn't seem shocked or amused or sympathetic. He just listened, took a few notes, then went back to confer with his partner and Hassan. I watched them talking, all 3 of them, and I felt so helpless. They were discussing my fate in a language I couldn't understand, in a legal system I knew nothing about, in a culture where apparently offering to trade your wife for livestock was something that could be taken seriously. The older officer came back to Marcus and explained in broken but understandable English that this was a civil matter, not a criminal matter, that the police couldn't force anyone to complete any transaction, but that if Hassan believed a verbal contract had been made and then broken, he had the right to seek compensation through legal channels. Marcus asked what that meant. His voice was shaking. The officer said it meant we all needed to go to the police station to file formal statements, that Hassan would file a complaint about breach of contract, that we would give our side of the story, and then it would be up to the legal system to determine what happened next. Diane asked if we needed to go to the police station, if we could just leave and go back to our hotel. Her voice had this desperate hope in it, like maybe we could just walk away from all of this. But the officer shook his head. He said that Hassan had made a formal complaint, that we needed to come to the station to give statements, that if we refused, it would look very bad for our case. Our case. Like we were already defendants in some kind of lawsuit. Like this ridiculous situation had already escalated beyond anything we could control. The crowd around us had gotten bigger. I could see people with their phones out, recording everything. Could see them talking to each other, probably trying to figure out what was happening. And I just wanted to disappear. Wanted to be anywhere but there, standing in that restaurant with police officers and angry Turkish men and a crowd of strangers watching my humiliation. We had to leave our lunch half-eaten on the table. Had to gather our things and follow the police officers out of the restaurant. Hassan and Mehmet and the 2 other men came with us, all of us walking through the Grand Bazaar in this strange procession. 2 police officers, 6 American tourists, and 4 Turkish men, all heading toward the police cars parked outside. The walk through the bazaar felt like it took hours, even though it was probably only 5 minutes. People stopped to stare. Shop owners came out to watch us pass. I kept my head down, couldn't bear to make eye contact with anyone. Marcus tried to stay close to me, but I moved away from him. Couldn't stand to be near him right then. Couldn't stand to look at the man who'd gotten us into this mess. We got to the police cars, and they separated us. Put Marcus in one car, me and the women in another car with one officer, and the men in a third car. Hassan and his group went in their own vehicle. Like we were criminals being transported. Like we'd done something wrong. The drive to the police station took about 20 minutes through Istanbul traffic. I sat in the back of that police car between Diane and Keisha, and neither of them said anything. What was there to say? We were in a police car, in a foreign country, because my husband had made a joke that nobody thought was funny, except him. The police station was this old building in a part of the city I didn't recognize. Gray concrete, narrow windows, official-looking Turkish flags hanging outside. We were led inside to a waiting area with hard plastic chairs and fluorescent lights that made everything look harsh and cold. We sat there for over an hour, just sitting, waiting. Watching Turkish police officers walk back and forth, dealing with other people's problems, speaking a language we didn't understand. Marcus tried to talk to me a few times, tried to apologize, but I couldn't even look at him. Every time I looked at his face, all I could think was, "You did this. You put us here." Finally, they called us back one at a time to give statements. I went first. They put me in this small room with a desk and 2 chairs and one bare light bulb hanging from the ceiling. The older officer sat across from me with his notebook, and a woman officer came in to translate. She asked me to explain what happened, so I did. Told her about the trip, about the restaurant, about the man approaching our table, about Marcus's joke, about how it had escalated, about how I felt humiliated and scared and angry. The woman officer translated everything to her colleague. He asked questions through her. Did I know this was a serious offer when the man first approached? No. Did my husband know? I didn't think so. Did we understand Turkish customs regarding verbal contracts? No. Had my husband explicitly stated a price? Yes. 30 camels. That last question hung in the air. Because that was the problem, wasn't it? Marcus hadn't just laughed it off. He'd engaged. He'd negotiated. He'd put a specific number out there. And in this culture, in this legal system, that apparently meant something. When they finished with me, they brought in Marcus, then Diane, then the others. We sat in that waiting area for hours while they took statements from everyone. From our group, from Hassan's group, from the restaurant manager who'd witnessed everything. It was nearly 6 p.m. by the time they finished. We'd been at the police station for almost 4 hours. 4 hours of sitting on hard plastic chairs in a foreign police station, not knowing what was going to happen next, not knowing if we were going to be arrested or fined or deported or what. The older officer finally came out and explained that this was a civil dispute, not a criminal matter. That the police had documented everything, but that we would need to resolve this through other channels. He suggested we contact the American consulate for assistance, that they might be able to help mediate. The American consulate. I'd never in my life thought I'd need to go to an American consulate for help. That was something that happened to other people, people who got in real trouble in foreign countries, not people like us, not people on an anniversary vacation. But here we were. The officer gave us the address of the consulate and told us it was closed for the day. It was after 5 p.m., but that we should go first thing in the morning. He also told us, in this very serious tone, that Hassan had every right to pursue legal action for breach of contract. That we should take this seriously. Hassan was standing near the door when we left the police station, talking with his attorney who'd arrived during our hours of waiting. The attorney was a middle-aged man in an expensive-looking suit, carrying a leather briefcase, looking every bit like someone who knew exactly what he was doing. When Hassan saw us leaving, he approached Marcus, told him they would see him tomorrow at the consulate, that his attorney would be filing the proper paperwork tonight, that they expected this matter to be resolved quickly and fairly. Marcus just nodded, didn't argue, didn't try to joke his way out of it. Just nodded like a man who'd finally realized how deep a hole he'd dug. We took a taxi back to the hotel, the 6 of us crammed into one of those larger cabs, riding in silence through the Istanbul evening. The city that had seemed so beautiful and magical just this morning now felt threatening. Foreign in a way it hadn't before. Like everywhere I looked, there were people who might not be on our side, who might see us as the ones in the wrong. When we got back to the hotel, Diane and Keisha came up to our room with me. Marcus and the other men stayed down in the lobby, giving us some space. The women sat with me while I cried. Really cried for the first time since this whole thing started. Let out all the fear and anger and humiliation I'd been holding in for hours. Keisha held my hand and told me this wasn't my fault, that Marcus had messed up, that we'd figure this out. Diane brought me water and tissues and just sat with me, letting me get it all out. I told them I couldn't believe this was happening, that this was supposed to be our dream trip, that I'd saved for 2 years, that I'd planned every detail, and now it was all ruined because Marcus couldn't keep his mouth shut. Diane said we needed to focus on fixing this, on getting help from the consulate tomorrow, on making sure Hassan didn't have any legal ground to stand on. But I kept thinking about what the police officer had said, about verbal contracts being taken seriously in Turkey, about witnesses being present, about Marcus explicitly stating a price. What if the consulate couldn't help? What if we really were on the hook for this? What if Marcus's stupid joke was actually legally binding? I didn't sleep at all that night. Marcus came to bed around midnight, and we laid there in the dark, not talking. He tried to apologize again, but I told him I didn't want to hear it. Not right then, not when I was still so angry I could barely breathe. The next morning, we were at the American consulate when it opened at 9 a.m. All 6 of us looking exhausted and worried. The consulate was in a secure building with guards and metal detectors and official-looking American flags everywhere. Just seeing those flags, seeing American security personnel, made me feel a tiny bit better. Like maybe finally we'd found some people who were on our side. We had to wait again. Seemed like all we did in Turkey was wait. But finally, around 10:30, they called us back to meet with a consular officer. Her name was Jennifer Morrison, and she was probably in her mid-30s with short brown hair and this professional but kind demeanor. She invited us into her office, offered us coffee, and asked us to explain what happened. So we did. Marcus did most of the talking this time, laying out the whole story from beginning to end. Jennifer listened without interrupting, taking notes occasionally, her expression remaining neutral. When Marcus finished, she sat back in her chair and was quiet for a moment. Then she told us that this was a sophisticated trap. She said scammers often use the concept of verbal contracts and honor to extort tourists. She explained that while obviously no court would enforce trading a person like property, these men knew exactly how to file civil complaints that could freeze our passports and keep us stuck in the country for months, fighting a legal battle we couldn't afford. My heart sank, because that's exactly what had happened. Witnesses were present. Specific terms, 30 camels, were discussed. Marcus had engaged in what could be interpreted as a negotiation. But Jennifer also said that obviously human trafficking was illegal everywhere, including Turkey. That no court was going to uphold a contract for the exchange of a human being. That the issue here was more about honor and compensation for perceived insult rather than actual enforcement of the sale itself. She explained that Hassan was likely looking for financial compensation. That he felt publicly humiliated by Marcus backing out of the agreement. That in Turkish culture, this kind of public embarrassment was a serious matter. Marcus asked what we should do. Jennifer said she could try to mediate. That if Hassan and his attorney were willing, she could facilitate a discussion to try to reach a settlement. Something that would satisfy Hassan's sense of honor while being reasonable for us to pay. Diane asked what would happen if we just refused. If we just went home and ignored this. Jennifer's face got more serious then. She told us that Hassan could file a lawsuit in Turkish civil court. That if we didn't appear to defend ourselves, he could potentially win a default judgment. That while collecting that judgment in the United States would be difficult, it could affect our ability to travel internationally in the future. That there could be legal complications we didn't want to deal with. She said the smarter move would be to try to settle this now, while we were here, while she could help mediate. To make this go away before it became a bigger legal mess, I asked how much money we were talking about. Jennifer said she didn't know yet, that Hassan's attorney would present their demand and then we'd negotiate, that it could be anywhere from a few $1,000s to… Well, she didn't finish that sentence. But the implication was clear. It could be a lot. She made some phone calls, and within an hour, Hassan and his attorney arrived at the consulate. They were shown into a conference room, and Jennifer invited us to join them. Sitting across a table from Hassan felt surreal, like something out of a movie. Here was this Turkish man in his traditional clothes, his expensive attorney beside him, looking at us with this expression of calm determination. And here we were, 6 American tourists who just wanted to enjoy our vacation, now trapped in this absurd situation. Hassan's attorney did most of the talking. His English was perfect. He'd studied law in London, he said. He explained that his client had been gravely insulted. That in Turkish culture, a man who makes an offer and then withdraws it without good cause is seen as dishonorable. That Hassan's reputation in the business community had been damaged by this incident. He said that Hassan was not actually seeking to complete the transaction. He understood that was not legally possible. But he was seeking compensation for the insult to his honor, for the public embarrassment, and for the time and resources expended in pursuing this matter. Jennifer asked what amount Hassan considered fair compensation. The attorney looked at Hassan, they exchanged a few words in Turkish, and then the attorney turned back to us and said $25,000. $25,000. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. That was more than our entire trip cost. That was more than we had in our regular savings account. That was money we couldn't afford to lose. The life just drained out of Marcus's face. He told them that was impossible, that we didn't have that kind of money. The attorney said they understood this was a significant sum, but that the insult was significant as well, that his client had been prepared to provide 20 camels, quality animals worth approximately $15,000. That when the agreement was broken, Hassan had to explain to his family and his community why the transaction didn't happen, that this had caused him real harm. Jennifer just sat there, watching them. She couldn't officially negotiate for us, but her presence was the only thing keeping them polite. I spoke up then, asking if there was a more reasonable number. Explaining that we were tourists on a fixed budget, that this was supposed to be a vacation, that obviously there was a cultural misunderstanding at play here. The attorney was polite but firm. said that his client felt 25,000 was already a reduced amount considering the circumstances, that they could have asked for much more, and that's when the real negotiation started. Back and forth, numbers being thrown out, Jennifer trying to find middle ground. Marcus getting more and more desperate, looking at me like he hoped I'd somehow fix this, somehow make this all go away. But I couldn't fix it. I could only sit there and watch as our savings, our future, our security got negotiated away, because my husband thought selling his wife for camels was funny. I could only sit there and feel the anger building and building inside me, knowing that when this was over, if we ever got out of this, Marcus and I were going to have a conversation about our marriage that he wasn't going to like. The negotiation went on for over 2 hours. 2 hours of sitting in that conference room while these men decided how much money would satisfy honor, would erase insult, would make this nightmare end. And all I could think was, this is my anniversary trip. This is what I saved 2 years for. This is what I dreamed about. And here I am, sitting in an American consulate in Turkey, watching my husband negotiate a payment for trying to trade me. The attorney wrote something down on a piece of paper, slid it across the table to Jennifer. She looked at it, then slid it to Marcus. Marcus stared at that paper for a long time. I saw his jaw tighten, saw his hands clench into fists, saw him close his eyes like he was trying to make all of this disappear. Then he looked at me, and in his eyes, I saw something I'd never seen before. I saw him truly understanding what he'd done. Not just the legal mess, not just the money, but what he'd done to me, to us, to our marriage. He looked back down at that paper, and I knew he was about to agree to whatever number was written there, about to sign away a chunk of our life savings to fix the mess he'd made, about to prove once and for all that sometimes your words do matter, that sometimes jokes aren't funny, that sometimes you can't talk your way out of the consequences of your own stupidity. Jennifer asked if we needed time to discuss it privately. Marcus shook his head, said we'd take it. Whatever it was, we'd pay it. Because what choice did we have? $8,000. That's what was written on that piece of paper. $8,000 to make this nightmare go away. $8,000 to satisfy Hassan's honor. $8,000 to compensate him for the public embarrassment of my husband backing out of a deal to trade me for camels. $8,000 of our retirement savings. $8,000 that I'd helped save by packing my lunch every day for 2 years. $8,000 that was supposed to be our security, our cushion, our future. Marcus signed the agreement right there in that conference room. His hand was shaking so badly he could barely write his name. Jennifer explained all the terms to us, that this was a settlement agreement, that by signing it Marcus acknowledged making the verbal offer, that we agreed to pay the $8,000 in exchange for Hassan dropping any and all legal claims, that this would be the end of the matter. The attorney pulled out more paperwork, documents in both English and Turkish, detailed legal language about breach of contract and compensation and mutual release of claims. Page after page that Marcus had to initial and sign. Then came the actually getting the money part. We had to go to our bank back home and arrange an international wire transfer. Had to sit there in that conference room with Hassan and his attorney and Jennifer while Marcus called our bank in Maryland. It was early morning there, and explained that we needed to transfer $8,000 to a Turkish bank account immediately. The bank representative asked if this was fraud, if someone was forcing us to do this. Marcus had to explain, in this humiliated voice I'd never heard from him before, that no, this was legitimate. This was something he'd agreed to. He had to verify his identity multiple times, had to confirm the account numbers, had to authorize the transfer. The whole process took almost an hour of sitting there knowing that every minute that passed, we were getting closer to losing a huge chunk of money we couldn't afford to lose. When the transfer was finally confirmed, Hassan's attorney checked his phone to verify the funds had arrived in the account. He nodded to Hassan, said something in Turkish. Hassan stood up, smoothed down his clothes, and looked at Marcus. He told Marcus that this matter was now settled, that his honor had been satisfied, that he hoped Marcus had learned the importance of keeping one's word. Then he turned to me and said, "And I'll never forget this." He said, "Madam, you have great value. Your husband should remember this." And then they left. Just like that. Walked out of the consulate with 8,000 of our dollars and left us sitting there in that conference room trying to process what had just happened. Looking back now, I know we were played. I know those men probably do this to 3 tourists a week. It wasn't about camels, and it wasn't about honor. It was a shakedown, plain and simple. And my husband walked right into it. Jennifer stayed with us for a while, brought us water, gave us some time to compose ourselves. She told us she was sorry this had happened, that cultural misunderstandings could be really difficult to navigate, that at least it was resolved now and we could move forward. But how do you move forward from something like that? How do you just go back to your vacation like nothing happened? How do you look at your husband the same way after he's literally paid $8,000 because he thought offering to exchange me was funny? We left the consulate around 3 p.m., took a taxi back to the hotel in complete silence. Marcus tried to hold my hand in the car, and I pulled away. Couldn't bear to be touched by him right then. When we got back to the hotel, Diane and Keisha were waiting for us in the lobby. They took one look at our faces and knew it was bad. Asked how much. When I told them 8,000, Keisha actually gasped, put her hand over her mouth like she couldn't believe what she was hearing. Diane asked what we were going to do now. If we were staying for the rest of the trip or going home. I told her we were going home, that I couldn't stay there another day. That every time I looked at this beautiful city, all I would think about was that restaurant and those men and that awful negotiation in the consulate. Marcus didn't argue, didn't try to convince me to stay, to salvage what was left of the trip. He just nodded and said he'd change our flights. Our original tickets weren't changeable without a huge fee. But at that point, what was another few $100s on top of 8,000? We were already drowning. Might as well go deeper. We managed to get flights out the next morning, lost 3 more days of the trip we'd paid for, the hotel we'd booked, the tours we'd arranged, the restaurants where we had reservations. All of it wasted. All that money and planning and dreaming just gone. That last night in Istanbul, I locked myself in the bathroom and cried. Sat on the floor of that beautiful bathroom with the deep soaking tub and the rain shower, and I sobbed. For the trip that was ruined, for the money we'd lost, for the humiliation I'd felt, for the trust that had been broken. Marcus knocked on the door and asked if I was okay. Asked if we could talk. I told him no. Told him I couldn't talk to him right then. Told him I needed space. I heard him on the other side of the door saying he was sorry, over and over again. "I'm so sorry, Gloria. I'm so sorry. But sorry doesn't give you back $8,000. Sorry doesn't undo the feeling of being discussed like property. Sorry doesn't erase the fact that your husband valued a laugh more than he valued your dignity." The flight home was awful. 14 hours with a layover, sitting next to a man I didn't want to look at, couldn't bear to speak to. Marcus tried a few times to start a conversation, to apologize again, to explain that he really didn't know, really didn't think it would go like that. But I just put in my earbuds and turned away from him. Diane and Robert and Keisha and Jerome were on the same flights home with us, but we weren't the same group that had flown over together full of excitement and anticipation. They could barely look at us. Not because they were mad at us, but because they didn't know what to say. What do you say to friends who just went through something so bizarre, so humiliating, so completely outside the realm of normal vacation problems? We landed at BWI on a gray Tuesday morning, the same airport we'd left from full of hope and dreams less than a week earlier. Robert drove us home in silence. When we pulled up to our house in Prince George's County, I got out of the car, thanked him for the ride, and walked straight to the guest bedroom. I locked the door behind me and didn't come out except to use the bathroom and get food when I knew Marcus wasn't in the kitchen. I couldn't be around him, couldn't stand to be in the same room with him. Every time I saw his face, I felt this surge of anger so strong it scared me. 2 weeks. I didn't speak to Marcus for 2 full weeks. He'd try to talk to me through the guest bedroom door. He'd leave notes under the door apologizing. He'd text me even though we were in the same house. But I couldn't respond, wasn't ready to respond. And during those 2 weeks, the story got out. Because of course it did. Diane and Keisha had both told their families what happened, asked for prayers and support. And once a few people knew, everyone knew. That's how it works in a community like ours. Gossip spreads faster than the truth. I started getting phone calls, text messages, people from church wanting to know if it was true. My co-workers somehow hearing about it and asking me what happened. My cousin calling me from Atlanta saying she'd heard through the family grapevine that Marcus had tried to trade me in Turkey. Some people thought it was funny. Told me I should laugh about it, that it would make a good story someday. Those people didn't understand. Didn't get how it felt to have your own husband assign you a monetary value in front of strangers. But other people got it. Other women especially. They'd call me and tell me they were sorry this happened, that they understood why I was so hurt, that they couldn't believe Marcus had been so thoughtless. One of my friends from work told me straight up that she would have divorced him. That there was no coming back from something like that, and I thought about it. Really thought about it during those 2 weeks locked in that guest bedroom. Thought about what the rest of my life would look like if I stayed married to Marcus. If I could ever trust him again. If I could ever feel valued by him again. If I could forgive him for this. On the 15th day, I finally came out of that room. Walked into the living room where Marcus was sitting on the couch watching TV with the sound off, looking like he hadn't slept in days. He looked up when he saw me, and his face. Honey, his face was so full of hope and fear all mixed together. I sat down in the chair across from him, not on the couch next to him. The chair, keeping distance between us. And I told him we needed to talk. He turned off the TV immediately, gave me his full attention in a way he hadn't in years. I told him that what he did in Turkey wasn't just a joke that went wrong. It wasn't just a cultural misunderstanding. It was a fundamental disrespect of me as a person. That when he offered to trade me for camels, even as a joke, what he was really saying was that he saw me as something he owned, something he could assign value to, something he could negotiate over. And that hurt me more than I knew how to express. I told him that I'd spent 35 years making excuses for his sense of humor, smoothing things over when he said something inappropriate, apologizing to people he'd offended, telling myself that it was just Marcus being Marcus. But this time, he'd crossed a line that I didn't know if I could forgive. I told him that $8,000 was just money. We'd recover from that eventually. But the feeling of standing in that restaurant while strange men discussed me like I was merchandise? That feeling was never going away. That was going to be with me forever. And I told him that if we were going to stay married, if I was going to even consider staying married to him, things had to change, fundamentally change. Marcus cried, actually cried sitting there on our couch, told me he understood, that he'd been doing a lot of thinking over the past 2 weeks too, that he'd realized how thoughtless he'd been, not just in Turkey, but over the course of our entire marriage, that he'd always thought his humor was harmless, that people understood he didn't mean anything by it, but that he finally understood that intent doesn't erase impact. He asked what I wanted him to do, how he could fix this. I told him we were going to therapy, not the kind of therapy where you go a few times and then quit when things get better. Real therapy, long-term therapy, where we'd have to actually dig into our problems and figure out if this marriage was worth saving. He agreed immediately, said he'd go to therapy every day if that's what it took, said he'd do whatever I needed. So we started therapy, found a marriage counselor who specialized in helping couples recover from major breaches of trust. Dr. Williams was her name, and she didn't mess around. From the very first session, she made it clear that this wasn't going to be easy, that both of us were going to have to do hard work, that there were no guarantees this marriage would survive. We went every week for months, talked about things we should have talked about years ago, about how Marcus used humor to avoid real conversations, about how I'd enabled his behavior by always smoothing things over instead of setting firm boundaries, about respect and communication and what it really means to be partners. I learned things about myself I didn't like. Learned that I'd spent so much time trying to be the good wife that I'd lost parts of myself. Learned that I'd been so focused on keeping the peace that I'd let Marcus disrespect me in small ways for years. And those small ways had built up into this big catastrophe in Turkey. And Marcus had to face some hard truths too. Had to acknowledge that his constant joking was actually a way to avoid being vulnerable, to avoid taking things seriously, to avoid real emotional connection. Had to admit that he'd hurt me over and over again with his thoughtless comments and had never really faced the consequences because I'd always forgiven him. Dr. Williams made him do something that I think really changed things. She made him write out every instance he could remember over our 35 years together where his jokes or comments had hurt me or embarrassed me. Made him really sit with that list. Really look at the pattern of behavior. When he showed me that list, 3 full pages of incidents going back to when we first started dating, I cried, because seeing it all written out like that, seeing the full scope of how many times he'd prioritized a laugh over my feelings, it was overwhelming. But it was also necessary. Because you can't fix a problem you won't acknowledge. 6 months into therapy, Dr. Williams asked us both if we wanted to stay married. Asked us to really think about it, to be honest with ourselves and each other. I told her I didn't know yet, that I was still working through the hurt and the anger, that some days I looked at Marcus and felt love, and other days I looked at him and felt nothing but resentment. Marcus said he wanted to stay married, that he loved me, that he knew he'd messed up badly, but that he wanted the chance to be better, to do better. Dr. Williams told us that was okay, that it was okay for me to still be figuring out what I wanted, that healing from something like this takes time. And it did take time. A lot of time. We're a year out from Turkey now, and I can tell you honestly that our marriage is different. Not the same as it was before, and it never will be. But different in some ways that are actually better. Marcus is more careful now. Thinks before he speaks in a way he never did before. When we're out with friends or at family gatherings, I can see him catching himself, stopping before a joke comes out, considering whether it's appropriate. And when he does make jokes, they're different. Kinder. Not at anyone's expense, especially not mine. We set new boundaries in our marriage. I told him that I would never again just smile and nod when he said something that hurt me or embarrassed me. That from now on I would call it out immediately, right there in the moment, no matter who was around. And I've done it too. Stopped him mid-sentence at church dinners, at parties, in the middle of conversations with friends. And you know what? He listens now. Actually listens and apologizes and corrects himself. The money? We recovered some of it. Took us most of the year, going back to the same strict budget we'd used to save for the trip in the first place. Cut every expense we could, worked extra hours, put every spare dollar back into savings. We're not where we were before Turkey, but we're getting there. And we never did get to take that dream vacation. Never got to see all the things I'd planned to see. Never got to experience Istanbul the way I'd imagined. Sometimes I think about that. About all the tours we'd booked and restaurants we'd reserved and experiences we'd missed because we had to come home early. About the money we lost not just to Hassan, but to the changed flights and the unused hotel nights and all of it. But mostly, I think about what I learned. About myself, about my marriage, about what I'm willing to accept and what I'm not. I learned that I'd spent 35 years being too forgiving, too understanding, too willing to let things slide in the name of keeping the peace. And that pattern of behavior had taught Marcus that his words didn't have real consequences. That he could say whatever he wanted, and I'd always be there to smooth it over, to make excuses, to forgive him. Turkey broke that pattern. Turkey forced both of us to face truths we'd been avoiding for decades. Do I wish it had happened differently? Of course. Do I wish Marcus had never made that stupid joke? Every single day. Do I wish we'd gotten to enjoy our anniversary trip the way I'd planned it? More than anything. But I can't change what happened. All I can do is move forward with the knowledge I have now. The understanding of who Marcus really is and who I really am and what we're willing to work toward together. Some people ask me if I've forgiven him, and the honest answer is, I'm still working on it. Some days I wake up and feel like we're good, like we've moved past it. Other days I wake up and the anger hits me fresh, like it just happened yesterday. Forgiveness isn't a switch you flip. It's a process. A long, messy, complicated process. What I can say is that I've chosen to stay, to work on this marriage, to see if we can build something better from the wreckage of what we had before. And Marcus has shown up for that work every single day. He goes to therapy without complaint. He takes accountability when I'm angry. He's learning to be a better partner. Is it enough? I don't know yet. Ask me in another year. Ask me in 5 years. Ask me when we're old and gray and looking back on our life together. But right now, today, we're still married, still working on it, still trying. The story of what happened in Turkey has become something different in the telling. Some people in our community think it's funny now, this wild story about the time Marcus almost traded his wife for camels. They'll bring it up at gatherings, laugh about it, ask us to tell the story again. And sometimes I can laugh about it. Can see the absurdity of it, the sheer ridiculousness of what happened. But other times when people laugh, I remember how it felt in that moment, how small I felt, how worthless, how commodified, and the laughter stings. I've learned to speak up about that too. To tell people that it's not actually funny to me, that it was traumatic, that I'd appreciate if we talked about something else. And most people respect that. The ones who don't. Well, I've learned I don't need to spend time with people who can't respect my boundaries. Looking back now, I can see that Turkey was a breaking point in our marriage. But breaking points can go two ways. They can break you apart completely, or they can break open space for something new to grow. For us, it's been the second thing. We broke open. All the issues we'd been ignoring for years came spilling out. And once they were out in the open, we had to deal with them. Had to face them. Had to decide if we were going to do the hard work of building something better. And we chose to do the work. Both of us. That's the key thing. Both of us. Because if it had just been me trying to fix things while Marcus kept making jokes and avoiding responsibility, it wouldn't have worked. But he showed up. He's still showing up. And that matters. Do I trust him the way I used to? No. But maybe that's okay. Maybe blind trust isn't actually healthy. Maybe being clear-eyed about your partner's flaws and choosing to love them anyway. Maybe that's actually stronger than the naive trust I had before. My mama used to say that marriage is a garden. You can't just plant it once and expect it to flourish forever. You have to tend it, water it, pull the weeds. Sometimes you have to cut back the dead parts to make room for new growth. Turkey was us cutting back the dead parts, the patterns that weren't working, the behaviors that were toxic. And now, we're trying to grow something new in that space. Will it work? I honestly don't know. But I know we're trying. And I know that Marcus understands now, really understands, that I'm not a joke. I'm not property. I'm not something he can assign value to or negotiate over or treat carelessly. I'm a human being, his partner, his wife of 35 years, and I deserve respect, not just when it's convenient, not just when we're in public, always, in every moment, in every interaction. And if he can't give me that, if we get to a point where the work becomes too hard or the old patterns start creeping back in, then I know now that I'm strong enough to leave, that I don't need to stay in a marriage where I'm not valued, that I survived Turkey, survived the humiliation and the anger and the heartbreak, and I can survive anything. That's what Turkey taught me. Not about Turkish culture or verbal contracts or international law. About myself. About my own strength. About what I will and won't accept. About the power of setting boundaries and demanding respect. So here I am, a year later, still married to the man who tried to trade me for 20 camels. Still working through the hurt and the anger, still trying to build something better from the pieces of what broke. And I want to ask you something, because I've been carrying this question with me for a year now, and I need to know what you think. Did I forgive him too quickly? Should I have left? Should I have demanded more from him before agreeing to work on this marriage? Or was I right to give him a chance? To see if he could actually change, to see if we could build something better together. Because some days I look at him and think I'm being too soft, that I'm falling back into that old pattern of being the understanding one, the forgiving one, the one who makes excuses and smooths things over. That maybe I should have walked away and started fresh with someone who would have never put me in that position in the first place. But other days, I look at our 35 years together and think about all the good times we had before Turkey. All the ways he supported me and made me laugh and was there for me. And I think maybe people can change if they really want to. Maybe relationships can heal from even the deepest wounds if both people are willing to do the work. I don't have the answer. And I think that's okay. I think it's okay to still be figuring it out, still be working through it, still be uncertain about whether I made the right choice. What I do know is this: I'm not the same woman I was before Turkey. I'm stronger. I'm clearer about what I need and what I deserve. I'm not afraid to speak up anymore, not afraid to demand respect, not afraid to walk away if that respect isn't given. And maybe that's the real gift Turkey gave me. Not the trip I planned, but the strength I found. Not the dream vacation, but the awakening to my own worth. So I want to hear from you, really hear from you. Tell me in the comments what you think. Would you have forgiven him? Would you have left? What would you have done if you were in my shoes, standing in that Turkish restaurant, watching your husband negotiate your value with strangers? I'm going to read every single comment, because I need to know I'm not alone in this. That other people understand what it feels like to love someone who hurt you, to want to leave but also want to stay, to be angry and forgiving all at the same time. Thank you for listening to my story, for sitting with me through this whole long tale of the worst vacation of my life, for not judging me, or if you are judging me, for doing it in the comments where I can read it and think about it and maybe learn something from your perspective. God bless you all. And remember, when someone shows you who they are, believe them. But also remember that sometimes, just sometimes, people can change if they really want to. I'm still figuring out which one of those truths applies to Marcus. Still figuring out if I made the right choice by staying. Still figuring out what the rest of my life is going to look like with this man who traded me for camels and then spent a year trying to prove he could be better. Ask me again in 5 years. Maybe by then I'll have a clearer answer. But for now, for today, we're still here, still married, still trying. And some days, that's enough.